Welcome to the Have More Fun podcast. In this episode, I talk with Justin Zoradi about doing work that matters, how to be a hero, and what to do when you feel like a fraud.
And that is the most dangerous prayer you can ever pray. It's actually really, really terrifying. And I think that most people don't do it because of that. Oftentimes, if you ask them, like, okay, how did you actually do this? It always goes back to like the tiniest little thing. I've just learned now, again, to like chant that. They have their story, I have mine. And that has just helped me, again, kind of make those small incremental changes over time.
I recently read a great book titled Do Hard Things by Alex and Brett Harris. And in it, they share a story that rattled me. It starts with the fact that nearly every year up until 2012, when it was shut down by animal activists, thank you activists, and I'm with you, there was an elephant festival in Rajasthan, India, held to celebrate the strength and intelligence of these beautiful creatures. Handlers would enter their elephants in games of basketball and soccer. Elephants would perform choreographed dances to music. And the main event was a tug-of-war between one elephant and 100 grown men, which, if you're doing the math, equates to over 6 tons of men competing against one elephant. Which, if you're doing the math, equates to over 6 tons of men competing against one elephant. And you can probably guess the outcome. The elephant wins every time. Which makes this next piece of information even more disturbing. You might wonder how these handlers keep their elephants from using their incredible strength and agility to run away to freedom. Well, elephant owners in Asia and India typically don't have the problem of elephants running away or asserting their God-given strength because the handlers have created a surprising solution. They take a length of twine, tie it to a small wooden stake in the ground, and attach the twine to the elephant's right hind leg. And that's it. This beast, with the strength to best 100 men, is held back by a length of twine and a stake in the ground. It doesn't make sense, right? Here's how it works. When the elephant is still young, his owner takes him from his mother and shackles him to a large tree with a heavy chain around his right hind leg. For days and weeks, the young elephant will strain and pull, trying to break free, but all he succeeds in doing is causing the shackle to cut deep into his leg. Eventually, he gives up and accepts that he can't go anywhere when there's something around his right hind leg. Soon, the owner can replace the tree with a small stake and the chain with a piece of twine, because once the elephant feels even the smallest resistance, he stops. One jerk of the elephant's leg and the rope would certainly snap. One slight tug and the elephant could certainly upend the post, but it won't move from its spot. There's nothing but a piece of twine around his ankle, but there are heavy shackles around his mind. Do you ever feel like one of those elephants? Like you have incredible potential, but are being held back by nothing more than a piece of twine? Your strength is there, but you've forgotten how to use it. Living in this state is called a life sentence by performance coaches, and it happens when we experience 1 or 2 events that hurt us physically or emotionally, and we forget that we have the power to do something about it. Which is why I can't wait for you to hear from Justin Zoradi today. Justin's new book, Made for These Times, is exactly the kind of thing that can help us get unstuck and start recognizing our own power again. Justin serves as the president of Giving Fuel, a fundraising platform empowering thousands of organizations worldwide. And he also founded These Numbers Have Faces, a social enterprise investing in the next generation of African leaders. He's been featured on the Sounds Good podcast and relevant magazine Christianity Today and on the Storyline blog. Justin lives in Portland, Oregon with his family and writes at justinzoradi.com. I really love this conversation because Justin is the real deal. He's super vulnerable and is one of the best storytellers I have ever met. And so without further ado, here's my friend, Justin Zoradi. So Justin, I was so thrilled to read your book. It is amazing, and I can't recommend it highly enough. It comes out on August 21st, and it's called Made for These Times. And in it, you share the story of what happened in Chambon. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, during World War II, but I read the book Less Innocent blood be shed in college and have been profoundly impacted by the story of this small village ever since. And so, will you share about what went down there and how you say that being ordinary is what made all the individuals in this story so powerful?
Yeah, something really incredible happened in the 1940s in this tiny town in France. And it's one of these stories that, just overlooked as you think about the history of World War II and all the stuff that happened. And so essentially, there's this tiny town in France called Les Chambon, and it's this mountainous little village. No one would ever know that it ever exists. And something really remarkable happened there in 1940. And so essentially, there was this minister named André Trocmé, and they were just going about their regular life. And then the German occupation of France happened. And of course, they were just horrified with what was happening. And one cold night, there was a knock at Andre Trocmé's door, and there was a woman standing in front of him, and she was a Jewish refugee who had fled Germany, and she was cold and hungry, and she asked him, can I come in? And in this moment, he had a really important decision to make of, okay, am I going to throw myself into this or not? And so he said yes. And his wife then met this woman, and they let her in, and then she sat by the fire and she got warm. And what would go on with this tiny little interaction, this tiny, him saying yes one time, basically it then basically ballooned into this massive rescue effort where the entire town, it was him, it was his little church, and then the whole town began building this really impressive and skillful underground network to then move, in the end, about 5,000 Jews, most of them children, through Nazi-occupied France and into neutral Switzerland. And it's this fascinating story of kind of how they were able to do this. And it was so powerful. And it seems like, you read the book as well. And it leaves this really kind of lasting legacy on you of what it means to be a really ordinary person doing extraordinary things. So yeah, it was a pretty wild story.
I love it. And I love that really sets the tone for how you talk about that we as individuals can do amazing things in the world. And I think we as a culture are really desperately in need of more hero narratives.
Yeah.
We're emaciated, in my opinion, by this lack of fortifying visions of what it means to live with courage and heart, which is why I enjoyed your book so much. And so what would you say that all the heroes like Mother Teresa or Gandhi, or you mentioned Nelson Mandela as well, what would you say that they, along with all the other heroes that we would classify throughout history, have in common?
Yeah, I think, I'll answer that, but it also comes with the fact that too, and I didn't go too in depth with Les Chambon, but the reality is that, these people who built this amazing underground network, they were farmers and school teachers and stay-at-home moms, and they were nobodies, honestly. And I think that is really what made them powerful, right? Is that they could almost fly under the radar. And I think that we oftentimes think that we have to end up being someone like a Nelson Mandela or a Gandhi or a Mother Teresa or a Harriet Tubman or whatever in order to actually do great things in the world. And what we learned from Les Chambon is that just simply isn't true. You don't need to get a fancy degree to hang on your wall or attend the right conference or have 1 million social media followers in order to actually be important. And so that's why I love that story. But then I think too, to what you're saying, we do need heroes. And yet there's something really unique that there's some commonalities, I think, between when people go on to do radical things, what is it? And so I think there's actually two things. So firstly, I think that these people, be it Andre Trocmé and Les Chambon, or be it Mother Teresa, or be it me and you, we have to be willing to really pray that very dangerous prayer. And that prayer is asking God and telling God that I want to partner with you and I will go wherever you lead me. And that is the most dangerous prayer you can ever pray. It's actually really, really terrifying. And I think that most people don't do it because of that, because you just never know where he's actually going to then lead you, right? So I think that is a kind of the first commonality. And then the second one I would say, and I hear this across the board from anyone who's kind of gone on to do something really unique, and again, in their own homes, around their neighborhood, or around the world, it honestly doesn't matter. But something happens, and what that is that people like that, and what I want to inspire all of my readers to become, is people who respond to really small invitations, and I call them moments of obligation. And I think we will talk about that. But what it oftentimes means is that these are people who happen to just be awake and open and listening to seeing something around them. And when you hear it from them, someone who's gone on to do something incredible, oftentimes if you ask them like, okay, how did you actually do this? It always goes back to like the tiniest little thing where they saw one thing when they were 7 years old, or they heard someone say one thing to them, or they read a book and it said this, and it's the tiniest little thing. And then it's that small little kernel, that small little mustard seed that then just kind of explodes over time when they are then willing to like drive after it, you know? So those I think are sort of the two commonalities that I find when you are looking for a people who I would call who are made for these times.
Okay, that is brilliant. And you talk about this in your book, where that moment of surrender where you're like, God, I want to partner with you and I'll follow you wherever you go, or take me wherever.
Yeah.
And then also that moment of obligation. And I thought that was a fascinating term. And you actually had a moment like this, like you talk about when you were in Cape Town a few years ago. Will you share about that moment and the small decisions that followed in order to do something remarkable?
Yeah, totally. I feel like so privileged that God kind of gave me one of those, and yet I think that they are out there for us if we're open to them, and if we, if our eyes are open for them. And so, essentially, I was young. I was 23, and I'd finished college, and I moved to Belfast, Northern Ireland, to do peace and conflict work in Belfast. And then a big part of my job was then leading a trip of college students from Northern Ireland to Cape Town, South Africa, and we were working with Habitat for Humanity and building houses in the townships outside of Cape Town. And at that time, I really wasn't really thinking about kind of, I don't know what was coming next for me. I was just trying to be present there and do the work. And then something happened. And what happened was I kept meeting these amazing high school students in the South African townships. And I kept hearing the same story. I kept hearing the same story of students that had finished high school who wanted to go on to college and study, or they then wanted to build their own business of some kind. But because they were poor and they lived in the slums, and there'd been this whole kind of post-apartheid South Africa, huge challenges, they were stuck and they didn't know where to turn. And I was someone that I think was, cushioned by middle-class privilege, and my parents paid for me to go to college, which I thought was kind of normal, which I know isn't, but that's kind of what I felt back then. And I just began thinking, like, goodness gracious, this just doesn't seem right. Why do I get all of these amazing benefits, and here I am traveling around the world doing these things, and yet these now friends that I have are not having some of the same opportunities, and all that they want is this simple thing, which I either want to study in college or I want to start a business of some kind. And so I could sense this moment of obligation kind of building in me, and so then I left South Africa. I moved up here to Portland, Oregon, where I live now, and I was sitting on a park bench in the park blocks in downtown Portland, and I felt, what I would say is kind of the still small voice of God, and he said, "Justin, will you deny for others what you demand for yourself?" Which means, will I take opportunities for me and not allow others to have the same opportunities? And that was my kind of culmination with the relationships in South Africa, and then that experience on a park bench that then said, bam, I have to do something about this. And so I walked to a bookstore. I then bought a book, How to Start and Build a Nonprofit Organization. And then from the couch of my apartment, I then started at the time, this tiny little organization called These Numbers Have Faces, trying to help one young man that I had met in South Africa. Again, a very small mustard seed kernel size thing, which then has now gone on to impact, tens of thousands of young people throughout Southern and Eastern Africa.
And these numbers have faces. I mean, you're doing such remarkable work. Will you tell me your favorite story from leading the organization?
Yeah, I think my favorite story, gosh, I mean, there's so many. We were set out to invest in young leaders throughout the entire continent, just realizing that young people come to this place kind of when they hit about 18 of which way are they going to go. And we just felt like developing young leaders was so important, especially because kind of in the context of Africa, everyone loves to, invest in the like cute kid, that they can sponsor, which I'm totally for. I love that stuff. But also, when you hit this older age, these are actually really important times for many of these young people. So I would say my favorite story that I think also will like really resonate here is that we began working in refugee camps in Rwanda. So these are Congolese refugees who fled violence in the Congo in 1997, and then have been settled in these camps that are really challenging, some of the hardest stuff that I've ever seen. And there was a young woman named Alice who just had this unbelievable grit and power. And she was so motivated despite living in a mud hut with a tarped roof. And Alice joined our university leadership program as the only girl in her entire class who was studying engineering. And again, something like that is always mainly reserved for men. And she was this amazingly powerful young woman who then ends up, being the top of her class the entire time. She goes through our full college program, graduates, and then she joined our Accelerate Academy program, which is our incubator for young entrepreneurs. And she then built the most amazing product. She started a little company, and she started building solar lanterns because she realized that there was a huge problem in the refugee camps where they don't have electricity. And so she then 3D printed and manufactured these amazing solar lanterns, and then is able to then give them out and sell them in all these various refugee communities throughout the entire region. So now folks have light to read by and study by and cook by and all the rest. And this is just a powerful young woman who saw a really important need and then actually went out and just did it. And again, we are talking about ordinary people. She's not special. She comes from a refugee camp, and yet there was a light in her that I think God was just waiting to just launch out, and now she's just this amazing hero. And so those stories I think are so inspiring to me, and I love to sit back now and go, oh my gosh, I cannot believe that of course this is where this whole thing would go.
Yeah, I mean, I'm speechless. It's just staggering the implications and the ripple effect of one choice that you made. And now so many people are being impacted and people have light, because of that decision. So,
Yeah,
what
totally.
a beautiful outcome from one decision. I love it so much.
Yeah, right.
Okay,
Yeah.
so do you have any tips for someone who's listening right now and they're maybe in the middle of experiencing their own moment of obligation?
Yeah, and gosh, and if you felt it, if you're listening and you felt this thing where you feel like, oh my gosh, this is like, I think I'm meant to sort of go after this thing. It's so challenging because you face so much resistance of just, you're not good enough, you can't do it, who are you to think, that like maybe you could do anything good in the world, you're a fraud. I mean, there's so much of that internal monologue that I think we've all felt that is so devastating, right? And I actually talk about it in the book a lot, about how you fight back against that, that I think could be really, really helpful. But I would say a really practical tip, and one that I found really important, that if you're someone that feels like you've got that spark, you're like, yes, this is my thing, my suggestion is 30 minutes per day. And what that means is you set aside time sometime in your day. I mean, for some folks, it's like 5 a.m., other folks, it's 11 p.m. It doesn't matter. It's all for you. But to spend and set a timer 30 minutes per day where you are going to explore this moment of obligation in some way. So that, that doesn't mean work. That could be reading about it. It can mean writing about it. It can mean calling a friend on the phone and saying, hey, can I just talk to you about this thing for 30 minutes? it means, praying about it for 30 minutes. I love going for a walk and just going, right, I'm just going to think about this thing for 30 minutes. And just that alone of setting up time, and so much of, I think, us finding and like building success really is just time management, And so I think that if you can create 30 minutes a day just to build on this in some way, you'll be so surprised with how those small little 30 minutes actually layer on top of each other, going forward. And then lastly, one other thing I would say for those people, if you've begun seeing this, you've begun building a kind of upon a moment of obligation in some way, what's going to happen to you, and I'm sure you felt this, Mandy, is that the comparison game is just going to start hammering you. So you'll be seeing people online or like a TED Talk or a friend of yours doing cool stuff, and you'll think, oh my gosh, I just can't be like them. I'm worthless and all the rest. And what I've found that's just the most powerful tool for me is that whenever I see someone who is doing something that is so impressive and amazing, where then I start to feel really guilty and I kind of feel crappy about myself, what I do is I then have this like mantra. And what it is I then say to myself over and over again, I say, they have their story and I have mine. They have their story and I have mine. I have to like chant it. And then only that can then kind of like calm me down and go, you know what? They're doing their thing. It's awesome. Great. But I have my own story. And as soon as we start comparing ourselves, our beginning to someone else's middle and end and climax and celebration, we're ruined. So if you can just chant that to yourself as you go forward, it just releases so much weight. And that's just a really great way to just make this a reality.
Thank you for talking about that, because I feel like there are so many of us who feel that way and yet are afraid to maybe say it because we're like, I'm the only one who's like feeling insecure by seeing someone else thriving or in their space doing their thing. So I really appreciate that you're kind of leveling the playing field for all of us and calling it out, because we need it.
Well, yeah. And honestly, what's the worst part of it is actually well-meaning people, friends and family, who actually make it worse for me. And what they do, and again, they don't mean to, but I will get emails from friends who, and they'll say, Justin, have you heard of blank awesome author or blank awesome entrepreneur who is doing this whole thing, like taking over the whole world? Maybe you should like meet them or become friends with them or learn from them. And when I'm at my absolute best, I probably can, but 9 times out of 10, I see that and I just feel like total garbage, like, oh, thanks, Sarah. So I think that's like the hardest thing. And so I've just learned now again to like chant that. They have their story, I have mine. And that has just helped me again, kind of make those small incremental changes over time to just drive forward kind of my own calling.
It's such a useful mantra that I feel like we can all borrow. So thank you for throwing that out there. There's a story you share in the book, and you touched on this a little bit, but about Andrew Garfield and his confrontation with this same fear that we're kind of talking about, right? Where I know in my own life, I feel like I'm going to be found out as a fraud, right? Everybody's going to figure it out that I'm just faking my way through this whole thing and that I have no clue what I'm doing. And so do you ever feel that way, one, but then second, can you talk about Andrew's experience and what it can teach us about facing those hard beliefs head on?
Totally. So firstly, do I feel that way myself? Yes, I'm currently feeling that right now. I mean, I was, before we like jumped on, I was in the bathroom looking at myself in the mirror going, okay, you can do this. Come on. I mean, like, that's like what it is every day, So it's so normal, whether you've like written a book or started a thing or not. I think that frankly, the folks who don't feel that, they're total frauds. I mean, if you, I've heard it, said that a true artist is petrified by fear. And if you are not, you are lying to everyone, So anyway, so yeah, the Andrew Garfield story is fascinating, and it has been a huge inspiration point for me. So just for context, Andrew Garfield is now this very famous actor, and he was in Spider-Man. He was in Silence. He was in Hacksaw Ridge. He was in The Social Network. I mean, he's been nominated for a Golden Globe and an Academy Award. And so you always look to someone like that and think, my goodness, they've just been crushing it their whole lives, right? And so when he was young, he was just getting going, and he was cast in Shakespeare's Hamlet to perform at the Globe Theatre in London, which is a big deal, right? And so it's about an hour before his first performance, and he starts just freaking out. And to kind of calm his nerves, he leaves the Globe Theatre. He walks down to the River Thames, and he starts thinking, I'm a fraud. I can't do this. I'm not cut out for this. And he actually says, I should throw myself in the river. I should end it all. Like, I just can't do it. And then something really remarkable happened. And there was a street performer near him, this like busker, guy with a guitar. And the guy was playing that famous song by Don McLean called Vincent, about Vincent van Gogh. And it's this awesome song. But it was that the guy who was playing it was actually terrible. Like, he was bad. And it was, and Andrew, watching him, was so inspiring, because what he realized, what it was like, this guy's courage to get up in the morning, go out there and suck, was so powerful, right? And that it was the imperfection of this guy's performance that kind of brought him back from the brink. And then he says the clouds parted, the sun shone down, and he said that God kind of grabbed him by the scuff of the neck. And he said, Andrew, listen, you think that you will die if you go up on stage, but actually, if you don't do it, that's when you will actually die. Because again, this guy was destined to be an actor, and that if he didn't do this, it would rot him from the inside out. So he had to do it. And so seeing this guy playing the song terribly inspires him. He goes, right, I don't have to be perfect. I can do this. He then runs back to the Globe Theatre. He crushes it, obviously. And now he then goes on to be this amazing actor who's done incredible things. And so I was so inspired by that, because again, we've all been there. We've all felt that penetrating fear that we are frauds, we're not good enough. But again, seeing other people's imperfections realizes or helps us realize that, of course, we have those also. And so we can now go out and just do small change, do small things over time, imperfectly, and it's simply good enough.
So beautiful. Okay, I'm going to completely change topics now, because there's another part of your book that I want to touch on before we wrap up. And that is this idea that you explain it's okay to sometimes leave work unfinished. Will you talk a little bit about that and why you think it's important for us all to remember?
Yeah, we have a problem in our society. I think around ownership. We think that, anything that we do, we own outright. And also that, of course, we have to be the best and complete it all the way. And only when we finish it to these crazy high standards will we ever be satisfied. And as a result, so many of us live, I think, in just anxious toil as we just fight for perfection, I think in some ways. And I faced that. I think when I was first starting my organization, I just had so many pressures that I put on myself, and I just felt like I had to do it perfectly, and we had to hit all these certain goals, and only when I did this would I be satisfied. And it just began to just make me unravel, honestly. And I was so inspired when I finally realized, I think both from a theological standpoint and just a practical one, that actually that our work is meant to be unfinished. It is meant to be incomplete, that the foundations that we lay will be shaky and need further development, that the seeds that we plant will need way more water than we are ever able to provide, that our accomplishments will actually be multiplied by others long after we are gone. And I just feel that God, on purpose, gets us going with something small but powerful, but then is then already working and building to then bring in others to then pick up where we leave off. And when you understand this, that your work is meant to be incomplete, it's totally liberating. I mean, it's the most kind of scales off the eyes, weight off of your shoulders feeling, because what it means is that now you can just do something small, do it well, and you don't have to do everything. And when I realized this, when I realized that others will come after me when I am done, and that my job today is just to show up, to work hard, fine, to do something small, but then there's just so much more going on behind the scenes. It provided me with so much peace to then keep going in this, because otherwise, honestly, there's just too much. There's just too much pain. There's just too much pressure, cultural pressure, personal pressure, family pressure, financial pressure, whatever else it is, and we have to liberate ourselves from that in order to be successful.
And I feel like it extends to every area of our life, right? Like not only our work, but our parenting. Like we really don't
Oh my
get to
gosh.
say how it all turns out. Like we do our best in the
No.
moment, and then our kids end up to be adults who make their own choices. So I love it. And it's so freeing. And I feel like it helps us to bring our best to whatever's in front of us at the moment without having to be so grabby about it.
I think it's totally true. I mean, yeah, I mean, your kids, I have a 4-year-old daughter, and I have a son on the way. He's due in 1 month. And I have to let that go, that, I can do my absolute best. But as soon as they turn 18 and move out or whatever, I mean, of course you can be involved, you can help, you can do anything, but we have to, in some ways, kind of let them go and let them become who they were made to be beyond us. And I think there's something so powerful about surrender. I think the term that I like is surrender is love. And we have to really realize that if we truly love something, we have to let it go. And that's actually kind of toward the end of my book. I do talk about, after 10 years leaving the organization that I started through some really challenging times, but it's been so good, because we get to certain places where, again, other people are actually more suited than us to then drive things forward. And that is okay. And that is the way that it is meant to be.
Wow. That's brilliant. Brilliant advice. Okay, I have a question. That's my favorite question to ask my friends.
Yeah.
And that is, what is the best advice you never got?
Yeah. Gosh, I have a great one, I think. And what that is fail and fail hard because no one is paying attention. And what it means is that we forget how narcissistic humans really are. The reality is that no one is thinking about us except for us, right? And yet we seem to think, because we are so narcissistic, that actually everyone is thinking about us and judging us and wondering, oh, is he or she doing okay? Or, whatever is happening. And the reality is that they are not thinking about us, because obviously they are thinking 100% about themselves, right? And so what this means, though, is as you get your little moment of obligation, as you build in small ways toward maybe this calling or thing, whatever it is, go for it and blow it and fail, because honestly, no one else cares. It sounds ridiculous, but it's so true. I mean, so often I've tried things, or even when I was leaving These Numbers Have Faces, the org that I started, and I would kind of, I've been through this huge pain and this letting go process, this surrender. It's so intense for me and all the rest. And then I then tell people like, yeah, I'm actually transitioning, and I'm expecting them to go, oh, Justin, you must have been through so much pain and blah, blah, blah. And actually they all just go, oh, cool, man. Like, what are you doing next? It's like, they don't care, you know? And there's actually something really wonderful with that. So again, if you have any vision of any kind, we desperately need you to lead us toward the next future. But don't be scared to just go for it and just bomb hard, because again, literally very, very few people, maybe like your mom or your spouse, besides that, like, are actually really paying attention. So like, you can liberate yourself from, other people's opinions of you, I think, for the most part.
Okay, I feel like we're all going to be more free and better human beings because of this conversation. So you're killing it, first of all.
I don't know, maybe.
Okay, last question for you, mostly because I'm curious and I just like hearing people's answers. What are you doing right now in your life to cultivate more fun?
Yeah, the fun thing is great, and I checked out your book on fun, and so I was like, oh, maybe we're going to talk about about all this. So, fun is so important, and I will confess to you that I'm someone who struggles with it. I don't know, how are you into the Enneagram kind of personality
Yes.
stuff?
What number are you?
So I'm a 1 wing 2. All right.
Okay.
And
All right.
so what it means though is that like I can be pretty intense in some ways, but when I am in times of health, when I'm actually doing well, I go to 7. And 7, amazingly, is where my wife is. And 7s are the enthusiasts. They are so fun to be around. They're the life of the party. And so it's so helpful for me to be married to someone who then is like, you know what? You've just got home from work. Time to shut that whole thing down because it just doesn't matter. We're going to rest. And you know what? We're going to drink this bottle of wine, and, we are going to binge watch Netflix, or we are going to go for a hike, or go outside, or go to a concert, or, whatever else. And so that in itself is so helpful. But for me, I would say that honestly, having kids has been so helpful in this, because it just forces you to do little fun things that of course you wouldn't be doing otherwise. So I get so much fun, taking my 4-year-old daughter Josie to the park and running around with her. That's a total blast for me. So doing family stuff is so helpful for me to also kind of turn off all the kind of intense calling vocation stuff. Again, that's so important. But if you don't have the right balance in that, if you don't put fun in as a massive piece to going after your calling, you are going to just spiral. And so I think from a kid standpoint, that's a huge help. And then lastly, I'm a massively obsessive soccer fan. And so I am really, really into that. So both playing, but then I go to games every single weekend, and I'm a part of that. I do a lot of soccer tourism. So if I can, flying places to watch games in other stadiums around the world is a huge thrill for me. And so that's kind of how I find fun in the world.
Justin, thank you so much. Everyone go out and pick up Made for These Times. It's coming out August 21st, and you need to read it. Hey there, thanks so much for listening. In this episode, we talked all about getting unstuck and finding your fire again, which coincidentally is MOPS theme this year, Find Your Fire. We've partnered with the Giving Keys, and they have created unique, one-of-a-kind keys just for us that have the word fire on them. So if you at any point need a reminder that this is the year to find your fire, sign up for MOPS membership, and we will send it straight to your house in the cutest little package with your welcome kit. You can go to mops.org and register there, and we would love for you to join us this year as we all find our fire together. Now go out and have more fun, and don't come back until you do.